Hi, everybody, and welcome. As we are getting, everyone's getting their video set up and connecting to the audio, I just wanted to introduce and welcome everybody. My name's Colin Fedor. I am Chief of Staff for Representative Garlick. I'm excited to be here tonight, albeit virtually. I just wanted to go over a few logistics for the evening. First, we're going to just around questions and answers. Over the course of the presentation, just type your questions into the chat as we go. If you're watching on Medfield TV, you can also call 617-871-0218 and leave a voicemail. Isabel Lane from our office is going to be monitoring the chat and the voicemail for themes. And at the end of the presentation, we are going to bring in members of the community to be able to ask questions directly. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the Medfield Town Administrator, Christine Trierweiler.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. It's hard for me to believe that it's been a year since we were all together at the Public Safety Building, and so much has happened in that year. We're all on Zoom tonight together, and did any of us even know what Zoom was a year ago? So it's great to see that we've all met that challenge. And I love most of all to see that our annual events like this are still able to continue. They're so important to the community. It really makes me happy that we're able to keep moving forward with them. It's been an incredibly difficult year for all of us, and I can't tell you how important it's been to have Representative Garlick a phone call, usually a text, a panicked phone call away, who usually returns them in seconds to me. It's just been so helpful, not only for me as your town administrator, but then in turn for the town as a whole. So I thank her for her guidance and her help throughout this year. And it's my honor to introduce your state representative, Representative Denise Garlick.
Thank you. So I thank you very much for that, Christine. And Christine, I want to take a moment and thank you for your leadership, incredible leadership. How proud Mike Sullivan would be of you, for your partnership and all of the issues we're working on together, and for your friendship most of all. And through you to say hello to our select board, our elected boards, our volunteer boards, and all of the staff. It is an incredible community to work with. And I thank you for everything you do to set the tone and culture for that. At this time, I just want to remind people that I share the town of Medfield with my friend and colleague, Representative Dooley. He represents precincts 3 and 4, and I represent precincts 1 and 2. But I always, and I know that the people of Medfield know this, I carry all of Medfield in my heart and through my work. We wanted to talk briefly about how the evening is set up tonight. The report to the community. You know, I work very hard to deliver a 30-minute report so that we also have 30 minutes for questions. And I will breeze through some of this, and maybe in the questions we can go into more detail. And before we start, I want to take a moment to talk about the impact of COVID on our community. Medfield has endured 406 COVID positive individuals in our community, and has suffered not only illnesses, but death of some friends and neighbors, great veterans. And in all of this, we have had not only a public health emergency, but we have endured many financial hardships. And always I keep that in my heart and mind as I think about the community. I would like to introduce to you my team, which is all on the phone this evening. Colin Fedor, whose voice you heard, is my Chief of Staff. Maureen Callahan is the Legislative District Aide and does a great deal of our constituent work and is building wonderful relationships in the community. Isabel Lane is going to manage not only the question and answer period, but is a great communicator in many of the communications that you read and see, as in working with Isabel Lane, my work with Isabel Lane. And Philip Lynch is the Legislative Director, and so much more. You know that I represent 40,000 people who are the constituents of all of Needham, all of Dover, and precincts 1 and 2 in Medfield. And very briefly, I just have a schematic of the positions that I have held as your representative in the last 10 years. This is actually our 10th annual report. And as I move forward, I want to say, I'm aware that tonight there is a conflict with the school budget meeting, and I'm sorry for that. Very vitally important that Medfield, the Medfield channel is covering this so people can catch up. And I too will catch up with the budget meeting. I want you to know that I have worked on the issue of listening to your concerns in all of the ways that are listed here. And I feel like our communication between constituents, between the municipality and my office is strong. When we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the Garlick Press a little bit. I want you to know from the onset of the COVID-19 epidemic, from March to July, we put out a Garlick Press every single day to the total of 79 Garlick presses. At that time, we were just calling them Constant Contact. We have put out since then, through the summer, we went to a Tuesday, Thursday report, putting out 22 additional reports. And in September, we rebranded ourselves, but it's the same messaging. We have put out 37 Garlick Press. Anyone can subscribe at that email address. I want to talk to you about what it means to be connected to the community, to be listening. So not all the issues are issues that matter on Beacon Hill, and the issues that I talk to the Board of Selectmen with, that I talk to Christine with, and the constituents with are things that are happening in the community of Medfield and in the neighborhoods. One example of this is just around Eversource. Certain neighborhoods in Medfield were having an overwhelming issue with lost power. 7 of the last 7 storms actually, in which they were losing power. There had been a lack of tree maintenance over time, overgrown trees near the power lines. And of course, the risk continued in the future if we couldn't take care of that issue. This is a multifaceted issue. It took many conversations with Eversource. But I want you to know, because of the work of the town administrator and working with Senator Feeney as well as Rep. Dooley, we got a commitment from Eversource to fix the problem causing the power outages. And actually, this is a big fix because they moved the work that needed to be done in Medfield up on their capital plan by 3 years. And I'm hoping right now people have power so that they can see this program because of that partnership within the town. The next thing I'd like to talk to you about is connecting with the community to understand those issues. So these are the issues which I have heard from the community of Medfield on in just this past year. I want to highlight unemployment. We all frame the COVID-19 pandemic as a public health issue, which it is, but it has also been a time of terrific financial upheaval. And on the issue of unemployment, more than 384 people as of December 2020 in Medfield were on unemployment or had been on unemployment in that year. That's about 5.8% of our population. I want you to compare it with December of 2019, when 116 people were on unemployment in Medfield, which is about 1.6% of the population. Not only is the anxiety of being on unemployment and what is happening in relation to that and the uncertain time frame, but the process became complicated because of identity fraud, and we have put in considerable hours to ensure that the people of Medfield receive the unemployment that they need and deserve at this time. The other thing that we were dealing with around COVID-19 and the stay-at-home advisory that has affected everyone are these issues. And Medfield, in particular, the community, has worked very hard with their community coalition around the issues of mental health and substance misuse. And my office stays in very close contact on those issues. And finally, I want to talk to you about what that looks like for us when we're talking about COVID-19. We have seen support in 3 different ways. One is the federal, certainly the CARES Act, Families First. For you and for me, the federal support for our community was too little and it was too late. But we are moving forward. On the state level, the governor declared a state of emergency on March 10th. And that is how we were able to actually mobilize monies around unemployment insurance, around the mask mandate, all the information about reopening, what we're doing now. The state of emergency still exists around the vaccines. Legislative actions also took place to facilitate the COVID-19, how we could continue functioning. And certainly some of that was the voting options and relief and economic support. We continued on with our budgets, and there was a great sense of sensitivity to small business. On the local level, I want to take a moment and really call out the Board of Health in the town of Medfield. These are volunteers who have assumed a great responsibility and are working steadfastly around the issues of COVID. Certainly we have a facility in the town for older adults, and on top of that, we have a council on aging. And I know that Roberta is watching this and her staff is as well. The Council on Aging has done extraordinary work in reaching out to the older adults of Medfield, not only in ways that are informative, but in ways that increase that sense of a network. You know, things that sound simple, like driving up to get an ice cream sandwich, actually builds community and reminds people that they belong to something bigger. So for all of the great things that the Council on Aging has done, and all of the things that might seem small, they have all made a difference, as have the community organizations in the town, certainly the Medfield Food Pantry. I'd like to talk to you briefly about the legislative actions on COVID-19. I'm not going to go into detail at this time, a little bit on some of these later, and certainly in the questions, but certainly the mail-in voting for local, state, and federal elections, the municipal flexibilities. Now, this is something that most members of the community may not realize was a need, but your select board was very nimble in moving and finding ways to continue to do their work and to communicate as well. The public funding and data reporting, I will talk about more. For individuals, the state did the delayed income tax deadline as well. I want to take one moment and talk to you. At the very bottom, do you see this banner that says the SAFE Act? SAFE stands for State Action on Public Health Excellence. This is an issue that I have worked on almost the entire time that I've been your representative, filing legislation in 2016, establishing a commission that reported in 2014, a commission that reported in 2016, legislation in 2018. This is about the great need of the Commonwealth to increase their public health and regional health services, how we fund them, and what our expectations are. When we talk about vaccines later on, I'm sure will come up in a question. I want you to know Massachusetts is known for its incredible, well-deserved reputation for healthcare infrastructure, but that does not mean that we have that same robust, vital infrastructure in public health. And every year I have worked on this issue and will continue to work on this issue. And finally, I just wanted to highlight the monies that had come into the town because of a variety of revenue streams. When you look at this, is the CARES Act, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, then the state mobilized money for elementary and secondary school emergency fund and COVID supports. This is the money that came directly to Medfield. That money was able to be used for ventilation, for some remote learning issues, for PPE issues. It is a drop in the bucket compared to what Medfield really needs. I'm glad we were able to mobilize some monies, but I am deeply respectful that we need more. I'd now like to go on to the section around the budget, since we're leaning into this money issue here. So on the budget, and you know that we are in a budget cycle now, but let me show you what it looked like in 12 months. And for people who think about budgets, in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Ways and Means Committee, the governor, was working on 3 budgets simultaneously. The budget cycle is from July 1 of a year to June 30th of a following year. So we were closing out FY20, incredibly important. You don't know how much more money you have that can be exercised until you can close out the books completely. We were writing the FY21 budget that began on July 1 of this year. Usually the House would be voting on our budget in late April. Instead, in late April, we were in the throes of the pandemic. It was very unclear what our revenues were going to be. It was very unclear if there was going to be any federal help. And so for the year, we planned the budget almost month by month, which was a tremendous burden for our municipalities as well. And then we were planning for the current budget, which is FY22. What does that mean for Dover? It means two things. When we go to the next slide, two of the most important revenue streams of the, I said Dover. Two of the most important revenue streams that Medfield counts on is local aid as well as Chapter 70. One of the things we did very early in the pandemic is we guaranteed to the communities that we would have level fund the local aid money and the Chapter 70 money, regardless of what else was happening in the world that we could predict or that we couldn't predict. We wanted to keep these two budgets stable. It was a promise. It was a promise that we kept, and it allowed the town of Medfield to have a stable, sustainable, and predictable budget moving forward. The other thing that we did, and I keep balancing with you this public health impact as well as these financial hard steps, is the small business supports. And they're listed here on the side, but there was a great sensitivity to the needs of small businesses. We are trying to keep the Commonwealth sustainable in this difficult time so that the Commonwealth will prosper in future times. And so we are supporting the small businesses in this way, and happy to answer more questions on that. I get contacted by, and I wanted to especially do this. So one of the ways we were supporting the small businesses was through a grant cycle. And in the town of Medfield, not only the work that Medfield did about outdoor dining, but Medfield received 12 grants, their small businesses, to support them as the year was going on. When I talk about being able to listen to the community, I'm going to just talk to you about a few aspects of this budget that I was contacted about by constituents. As you can imagine, when I talk about the budget, now the Vice Chair of Ways and Means, I have a very global view of the budget, but I was contacted by Medfield constituents about developmental services. This is individuals with intellectual or developmental delays and individuals with autism. This is important to us in our community. Some of our members may go to the Child Service Center. Many of our family members may go to the South Norfolk Arc. And I always support this work. The Chapter 257 rate reserve is about the workforce that works in those places. The next thing that I heard from constituents was around the environment. And we will talk about the environmental bill, but this became important around the money for the state parks that became this incredible amenity for people of the Commonwealth, just like the Medfield State Hospital property is a valued environmental amenity in Medfield. And the issue of food security, I called out the Medfield Food Cupboard already, who has done extraordinary work. The issue of food security has been overwhelming in the Commonwealth, overwhelming, heartbreakingly so. And in the state budgets, as we were moving through month by month, and in the final budget we brought out in December, there's a great sensitivity to the issue of food security. And there is also additional money that you may have heard, you may be interested in, about one-time revenues. For the people that are on the warrant committee in Medfield, what we know is one-time revenues are great, but you can't build a budget on it. You can meet a need, you can fill a hole, but these are the one-time revenues we received. The other part of my work certainly is around legislation. And I wanted to talk to you about what it means. The most important goal for our legislation, we actually focus very clearly on a lane of legislation related to COVID-19 early on. And we wanted to be both a responsive and a resilient Commonwealth. And these are some of the major bills that we were able to take on in that time. The issues related to, I'm going to pull out a few to discuss. Certainly, I want to talk to you about the Racial Equity and Law Enforcement Reform Bill. I want to share with you that this legislation was not a response to the murder of George Floyd, but it was urgent because of the murder of George Floyd. But a great deal of work had been taking place in the legislature, and particularly with the leadership of the Black and Latino caucus. And as we pulled together bills that had been worked on over a period of sessions and tried to perfect them, we were very clear to follow the leadership of the Black and Latino caucus. We brought forward language around standards and training commission. We will now certify law enforcement people in Massachusetts. That has not happened before. And that allows us, I'm a nurse, I'm licensed. Other people are certified in their work. It establishes a base of knowledge. It establishes standards that you're going to work on. We will now do this through the commission. And because we can establish the ability to certify, we can restrict or revoke or suspend individuals, but always with due process, always with due process. There is now a duty to intervene. Every single one of us that was moved by the murder of George Floyd, one of the most confusing elements was that while one officer kept his knee on the neck of George, the other three officers looked on. This will never be allowed to happen in our Commonwealth, never. There is a legal law for a duty of intervene. We dealt with the use of force issues and how that's changed over time and how to clarify that. And there is a discussion around a review of civil service with a sense that we want to make sure we can bring the best pool of applicants to be our law enforcement officials. This is something that I'm very intrigued and will follow carefully because I certainly see both the strengths and what may be the weaknesses in the civil service system. And we established other commissions around maternal child health, around the state flag and what that might mean to us, and around looking at what institutional racism is in correctional institutions, in the parole process, and in probation services. We actually brought forward a bill on promoting a resilient healthcare system. This is something that I have to tell you, I was very proud to vote on, but had not envisioned. As a nurse, I would have told you nothing is more important than that one-to-one interaction that you have with the patient. But during the COVID-19 time, we have learned that telehealth has tremendous benefits. And one of its greatest therapeutic benefits is in the field of behavioral health, which is substance misuse and mental health together. And we have seen better compliance and better outcomes for individuals that are getting their healthcare through telehealth. We have expanded the practice for nurse practitioners. We needed as many hands and as many boots on the ground during COVID-19 times. We still need that. And so we needed to make sure that nurse practitioners were allowed by law to practice at the highest scope of their license. And we talked about out of network and supervised billing and codified that into law. The other issue that I was proud to vote on was the many issues of reproductive health. You might recall before 2020 was the year of COVID, 2019 was the year of the woman. And in that time, the legislature, my session is a 2-year session, so it was the first year of the session. In that time, we had moved several pieces of legislation around Title X funding to ensure that that would not, that there would be supplemental funding for that. The Nasty Woman Act, that's an acronym. It actually was to make sure that we had wiped off antiquated laws that were on the books in the Commonwealth. The Patch Act was to ensure that there is sensitivity and confidentiality around information, particularly related to women's health. And the Access Act was to provide copay free contraceptives in Massachusetts. In the final banner down the bottom is the act providing for access to reproductive health services. This is the Roe bill. I voted in the affirmative on the Roe bill and have felt my whole life as a mother, as a woman, as a nurse, that I would always uphold a woman's right to choose. But we might want to discuss that a little bit further in the question and answer period. And finally, I wanted to bring to your attention I always say finally, but I'm not finally yet, but the next generation roadmap for Massachusetts climate policy. This is the climate bill. This is our work. I hear from many of my constituents in Medfield about their commitment to climate and our concern about what is happening with energy and the environment. This is a roadmap for net zero carbon emissions by 2050. It enhances Massachusetts' ability to deal with solar and wind. It is a workforce development bill. And I hear people who do not support issues related to the climate, that they say it will be too expensive. The work that we do will develop jobs. In fact, our state alone put $12 million in to train small businesses in environmental justice communities and fossil fuel workers to move towards clean energy jobs. And we're seeing not only our leadership in the Commonwealth, but we're seeing many corporations who are also moving forward with their own initiatives on this. And we were very sensitive to the fact of environmental justice. What this means is that there is always a consideration of public health and the impact of initiatives on different communities, and that we are very sensitive to that fact and we can mitigate those issues. And finally, the issue on economic development. And I want to back up just 1 minute on this climate bill. You're actually reading about this in the paper right now because we brought forward the climate bill. It was passed unanimously on the last day of the session, which actually was early morning of January 6th, and was sent to the governor. The governor vetoed the bill and has some arguments for some of the issues in which he thought that there needed to be further discussion. The bill has come back to the House. I have voted on this bill again to override the veto, and now it will go back to the governor, and we will see how the governor reacts to it at that time and ways to make sure that this becomes a law in our Commonwealth. So that brings us to the thought of economic development, which is important to all of us. And we have moved ahead with confidence on an economic development bill, not only to support science and technology research, which is a hallmark of our Commonwealth, but around the state payroll protection program. This is people who may not otherwise have qualified for unemployment, and we wanted to make sure that these small businesses that were not eligible in the federal program would be supported by our Commonwealth. And something very important to Medfield is the Mass Cultural Council, and we mobilized resources for that. On the issue of leadership, and I'm checking time, I think, on the issue of leadership. I am now the vice chair of Ways and Means. I want to talk to you about what that means. Ways and Means is the committee that sits at the nexus of policy and budget. Any bill that has a financial impact needs to come through Ways and Means. Any budget issue must come through Ways and Means. And so the ability to develop public policy that is funded sits in this committee. And I have always wanted to be in the committee where we could join those two things, because without the revenues, a good idea without money is just a good idea. So the other issue that I took on during this time is I have been the lead on the House COVID-19 working group appointed by the Speaker, share that with 4 other colleagues. And we have worked not only to preserve the processes of the House of Representatives, but to give all of the members the information they need and the support that they need to meet the needs of their constituents right across the Commonwealth. We did that not only through command center calls and daily questionnaires, but we also kept safe the members and an ability to function through remote voting. We are the first state in the nation that was able to move to safe, secure, equitable, accessible remote voting. And we have done a myriad of information briefings, one that I engaged in today with the Speaker of the House and Mary Lou Sutters on vaccines. And also with my team, my incredible team. We worked on a caring collaboration for vulnerable children and families. This is the issue around DCF. And not only did we talk about the most vulnerable children and accountability for them and looking at data related to them and making sure we had information, but also looking at the Foster Parents Bill of Rights and looking at the issues that in the COVID-19 response, 51As are reports on abuse and neglect. There has been a dramatic decline in 51A reports. I do not believe that's because the children of the Commonwealth have been safer in this last year. I believe it is because they have not been seen by teachers, by coaches, by healthcare providers, and we're deeply concerned about that issue. And I just want to, for my very last slide, last two slides, I want to tell you these are the policy and budget issues that we are watching in 2021. I'm sure, like in 2020, new things will come to our attention and we will move on those issues as best we can. And I do want to take at this time a moment to thank all of the incredible Medfield partners that I work with. It is an extraordinary town, and it is growing and it is changing, and it is sensitive and responsive to the needs of the residents who are there. And I believe that even in these dark days, when we think of the pandemic, Medfield has a bright and beautiful future. And at this time, we'll go to questions. And here's my good friend, Peter Filosa, and my thank you to Medfield TV for keeping the residents of Medfield informed and engaged during the pandemic. Thank you very much. So I'll ask you to introduce the questions at this time.
So we have not had any questions come into the chat at this moment. So if anyone does have a question, please feel free to type it in the chat. In the meantime, I can explain the question process a little bit more. So what we're just doing is waiting for you guys to send your questions in the chat. Once we have your questions, we will open it up so you can ask your question, and then we will move forward from there.
So, I'm going to jump in here while people may be thinking of questions they would like to ask. And I'm going to ask Maureen, I was anticipating there would be questions about the vaccine. So Maureen, can you just jump ahead and put up the slides that we have developed on the vaccine? So this is the question of the day, right? The question is, when can I get a COVID-19 vaccine in Massachusetts? And we all know that there are eligibility requirements. I just want to set the table for you. For anyone who is watching this tonight and is anxious about the vaccine, is frustrated about the process that we are concerned with, that we are engaged in, and who frankly may be worried for other members in their extended family, I share all of that. I share the frustration. I share the anxiety. We have to acknowledge that the federal government did not allocate an appropriate supply for our country. We simply don't have enough of a supply. It is my hope that we are going to move forward, that there is going to be more vaccine that is manufactured and quickly distributed to the states. But not only did the federal government in 2020 not make sufficient plans for the amount of vaccine that we needed, they actually allocated it differently to blue and red states. And certainly in our blue state, with a governor that was taking on this issue with a great deal of strength and energy, we did not fare well in the allocation. We are moving forward. You know that there are a number of sites that now you can receive your vaccine at. You're hearing about this opening of these large sites like Gillette and Fenway across the Commonwealth. I understand that there's a great deal of difficulty with the website. I have gone on the website. I have had a great deal of difficulty with it. I, with 113 fellow representatives this morning, met with Secretary Mary Lou Sudders. She certainly is very sensitive to the need that we need to streamline this process, and we need more vaccine in this state. So I wanted to share that with you. And if you are really struggling, please call my office. And we don't have vaccine for you, but we have an ability to help kind of work through the bureaucratic issues related to this. And the other thing I want to share with you is because I represent Needham, Dover, and Medfield, I work very hard to keep our three towns together. And one of the things I was able to do as your representative was to get enough vaccine for the Needham Health Department to vaccinate all the first responders in Needham, Dover, and Medfield. And we now move on to the conundrum about how we get the second vaccine into these very same people. But Needham is a qualified vaccination site. And I always, any discussion I have is about Needham, Dover, and Medfield together.
Fantastic. So we can start now with the questions. So first we have a question from Jeff Marble, who would like to discuss the vaccine. So I am letting you talk now, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff. So what do you need Jeff to do so that he can talk? Yep, there you are.
Are there any plans for the possibly local boards of health to have vaccine sites established in Needham, Medfield, or Dover for the 75 plus population? You know, I just look at my parents who are local, and the idea of taking them to Gillette for vaccines just is wholly unreasonable.
So I hear you, Jeff. So number one, Needham has been approved. There's 65 essentially community sites that have been approved. So one of those is Needham, and you can certainly call Needham. The really upsetting part of this is that the local communities that have been approved to give vaccine for the month of February are only getting 100 vaccines a week. You know, that this is compared to the number of people over 75 in Needham, Dover, and Medfield that need it. This is just, it's helpful for 100 people, but it's not helpful for everybody else. They are approved. One of the things when I talked to you earlier about strengthening local and regional public health is the understanding that not all of the local areas were ready to move ahead, didn't have the staff, didn't have the resources around administering the vaccines. This is something we have to improve in the Commonwealth.
Great. So our next question comes from Eileen and Brian Disorder, and their question has to do with the new speaker.
Mm-hmm. And what's the question?
Eileen now is permitted to speak.
There you go.
So,
Hi, Eileen. Hi, Brian.
So my question is, what are the consequences with the new speaker for your position and for our district, Representative Garlick?
So I want to break that up into two parts, Eileen. So the new Speaker of the House is Ronald Mariano. He's a representative from Quincy. He's been a representative, I think, for close to 30 years. I was very proud to vote for Speaker Mariano, and for many reasons, but I specifically want to talk to you about the one related to policy. And that is Speaker Mariano has been at the helm of all of the healthcare legislation in the Commonwealth. He is the chief architect of the 2006 healthcare bill, which is the template for the ACA. You know, Massachusetts voted the healthcare reform and the nation followed. He has been at the helm of every single healthcare bill since that time. And in fact, he serves on the virus advisory group presently. He, when I highlighted that bill around the healthcare bill we passed in this session related to telehealth and the surprise and out-of-network billing. He was the lead on the conference committee that did that. Now, for those of you who know me and know my work, that should lead you to believe that there's a great affinity between the new speaker and me on the issues that we care deeply about. Not only does he have my support and friendship, but I believe we're going to move forward with an aggressive outlook on how we're going to develop policy. There is a great sensitivity not only to the issues that I said should be coming up, but to the issues of equity in our Commonwealth and to the issues of how we can best position the Commonwealth moving forward with a great sensitivity to the many people who have suffered during this COVID-19 time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good to hear your voice always. And your
Thanks.
laugh, Brian.
Thank you, Honorable Representative.
You're welcome.
So our next question will be from Carol Reed regarding the SAFE Act.
So, hi, Carol. So, Carol, when I talk about the Extraordinary Board of Health in Medfield, you know that I am talking about you and your partners.
Oh, well, I'm surrounded with great people, Denise. So thank you for that. And thank you for all of your work and for your unwavering dedication to public health across the state. And, you know, we speak about it frequently, and I'll be targeted here. Does the SAFE Act legislation and funding that you've gotten, which is probably the first budget funding for public health in this way in the Commonwealth, could that be used in Medfield communities like ours, but specifically Medfield and Dover, to hire public health staff to build our capacity, and most particularly a public health nurse, because that is a function here that I feel would benefit all age residents.
So, number one, you're absolutely correct that a public health nurse would benefit residents of all ages. Absolutely. The way the SAFE bill is structured is certainly around setting up the resources to strengthen the existing health department. That the ability to use that money for operationally is going to depend on the second bill that we do, which is the SAFE Act 2 that I am sponsoring in this session. This session is 2021 to 2023, right? The next 2 years to the end of 2022. What we don't have presently, we put $10 million into public health in our last budget. Mm-hmm. But what we don't have presently is a dedicated revenue stream. Uh-huh. And until you have a dedicated revenue stream, it's very hard to fund operations, right? Mm-hmm. But the money that is there may be able to fund grants. Some of the work that you've done, Carol, has been related to grants. Presently, may be able to fund a grant for a person, might be able to fund some monies to share between towns, to share some kind of services on a specific subject. But my goal right now is to find a dedicated stream of revenue that public health in the municipalities will know that that money is there and they can build on it. I don't want it to be a reason not to fund public health. I want it to be the reason to fund it and build on it moving forward.
Right. Thank you. And I feel like sharing resources with a community like Dover or Millis or, you know, whomever is a smart way to build the foundation and be able to give support and good staff to each small community. Thank you for that answer.
You're welcome, Carol. Thank you. And you may know, Carol, and I got a text message from Christine that already Medfield is reaching out to surrounding communities. Medfield's Council on Aging and the Board of Health, you know, working with seniors and logistics. We're looking to Dover to see if we can work on the issue related to vaccine. both Dover and Medfield should be looking to Needham as we get more vaccine supply to be able to
Right.
meet the needs, just like at the very beginning of our conversation. You know, we can't have our older adults engaging in a day that is so strenuous that it's not good for their health in order to get
Right.
a vaccine that's good for their health. Yeah,
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much.
you're welcome.
So our next question will come from Michael Wasserman, who would like to talk a bit more about environmental policy.
Great.
So Michael, I'm allowing you to talk. If you unmute yourself.
And Maureen, will you go back to the climate bill slide?
Yeah, my question relates to the effects of the policies being implemented federally now that are welcome long-term, as a cleaner climate is certainly necessary and welcome. But my concern is that several years from now, some of these policies may result in $8 to $10 a gallon gasoline and soaring home heating costs. So while we cannot control federal policy, is there anything we can do in the state to protect the citizens from such a possible outcome?
So, and I missed your first name, I apologize.
Michael.
Michael. So Michael, this is a concern that I think is, if we only look at the issue through one lens, we think that there's going to be a great cost there. I think if we look at a more holistic view of what we're trying to accomplish with our climate policy, you know, as we bring solar and wind in to Massachusetts and we increase our capacity to do that, as we increase our capacity for hydrotherapy, those things are going to lower energy costs. So I think if we only look at one side of the equation, it could be overwhelming, but I think we have to look for the balance, and the work that we're doing around that workforce and development, around solar and wind, certainly around the work that the governor is advocating for related to the TCI and working with regionally around controlling costs. I'm hopeful that that's going to make a difference. I would tell you, Michael, I don't know a person on God's earth who get elected to their position if we allow energy costs to go to $8 to $10 a person for those issues. So it is going to be the consistent work of the legislature to make sure we have clean, reliable energy and that it is cost effective for the constituents of the Commonwealth.
Thank you. I certainly hope that, I believe that will prove correct over time. I hope it doesn't prove very incorrect in the short term.
Me too, and I'll work on it. I give you my word.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So our next question will come from Jeff Marble again, and his question has to do with the Medfield food cupboard.
Oh, good. Hi, Jeff. So Jeff, I want you to know you're my favorite participant tonight, because the hardest thing is when nobody asks a question. And for you to ask two questions is perfect. So thank you.
The first time you caught me by surprise. I thought it was just going to be my text question, but I'd like to start by thanking you for this forum tonight, and thank you for allowing us time to present questions, and thank you for your service for these last 10 years.
Thank you.
Speaking tonight representing the Medfield Food Cupboard,
Yes.
and in specific as the chair of the Space Planning Committee for the Food Cupboard. No surprise that COVID has really increased the demand on our food cupboard. It has really brought to the forefront the need for new space for ourselves. We're currently operating out of a local church basement. We've started talking with the town about the idea of the town leasing us space that we could build a privately funded building on leased space from the town. So we are at the stage right now where we're trying to identify a specific piece of property. We've requested space on the warrant at the upcoming spring town meeting to request that the selectmen can enter into a lease agreement on the chosen piece of property. It then becomes my understanding that if the if we get the property, the selectmen are allowed to lease the property. The alternatives then become either legislation to directly, allow them to offer it to the food cupboard, or it has to go through an RFP proposal. And I guess my question is, would you support legislation for the Medfield food cupboard in the town, to directly lease a piece of land from the town of Medfield? And any idea of what the timetable for something like this would be? And if I understand correctly, this is a similar process to what the Cultural Council in Medfield recently did with the chapel on the Medfield State Hospital grounds.
So I'm going to just back us up just a little bit. Number one, I just want to be on the record that I have visited the Medfield food cupboard. I have met the people who were standing in line as we were waiting for it to open. And I personally, I'm not asking for accolades on this, but I personally contribute to that Medfield food cupboard. I just want to tell you how extraordinary I think the work is that you're doing, and would always want to be part of that.
Thank you.
Wherever we would move forward, when I'm working with my staff, I always say to them, I need to know what the town of Medfield's residents want, and then that's what I want. So as you work through this, you're going to figure out, you and your board, you're going to figure out what's the best way to move. If the way to move is legislation, and if that is something that is supported, by the residents of Medfield and certainly by the Board of Selectmen, that's what's called a home rule petition. And we could move a home rule petition, and sometimes they take a long time to move, sometimes not quite so long. It would be something that I would concentrate on and make it a priority so that we could move it in a way that it becomes valuable for you to continue to plan the future for the Medfield.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to say one other thing, Jeff. My hometown is Needham. I am stunned by the amount of food insecurity in my town. I am stunned by the amount of food insecurity in Medfield. And it's a lesson to all of us. Everyone who's just finished a good dinner and settled down to watch this program, I want you to know there's likely somebody on your street, somebody in your neighborhood who's really worried about where that food was for dinner tonight or how they're going to get through the weekend. So it is one of the things that COVID-19, this terrible pandemic, has taught us, and it's an issue we have to deal with.
So at this time, we have no further questions in the chat, so I can turn it to you now.
Okay. So I am looking at my clock and it's 7:53, which gives us the ability to have 7 minutes that we didn't have blocked out for some other reason. To every single person who has taken the time and the energy to join tonight, I want to say thank you. Time and energy just seems to be at a premium these days. I will circle back, make sure I understand what happened at the school budget hearings tonight. I want to assure you that I am in touch not only with our town government, but with the school superintendent and any of the other town departments that may reach out, particularly around public safety and public health. And it is one of my most favorite things is to engage with the people of Medfield. And I know that Eileen DeSorga is on the line here. I want you to know that I am a state representative because of the town of Medfield. In a hard-fought race, it was the town of Medfield that gave that victory to me. And so you are always, I live in Needham, but Medfield's in my heart always. I thank you, and in any way I can be helpful, my staff that is so talented, so skilled, so committed to good government, and it's demonstrated in the work that they do. We are available for you at all times. And in these difficult public health times and financial hardship times, please reach out to us. And thank you and good night.